Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 26. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and today I have Heidi Hensley on the podcast with me, and Heidi and I talk about tough topics in ministry, which I think is really important because some of these topics, they're important. We deal with them all the time, but we don't get to talk about them a lot. You don't get to hear about them a lot in podcasts, maybe even in blogs and things like that. And I just know it's real. I mean, at the time that I'm recording this, our church has had a tough couple of weeks. And for me personally too, because like many of you, we always have to deal with families that are struggling, some brokenness, and some big things in people's lives that they just take a toll. And then there's also that side that we talk about of leading. How do you lead in the midst of that? Because we want to care and be there. But there's also things that we have to do as leaders, responsibilities that we have as leaders to lead well. And churches make decisions. You know, we're going to talk about some topics where you might totally disagree with the perspective you hear on this podcast. But I hope it's something that makes you think. I hope it's helpful. And I hope probably more than anything else, you realize that you're not alone. Ministry's hard and it's challenging. You know, most of us didn't sign up for those tough conversations and those heartbreaking moments, but they come. And so how do we step into that? How do we get in the midst of the mess and lead well and care well and serve well? I think is really, really important. So I'm glad that Heidi had this idea to talk about these tough topics, and I hope they'll be helpful to you. Before we jump in to the interview, though, I would really appreciate it if you'd be willing to leave a rating and a review on iTunes for this podcast. If you're listening to it on iTunes, you can just go, leave a review that way. It might be something you need to do later if you're listening in the car while you're working out and different things like a lot of people do. But that's one of the biggest ways this podcast gets put in front of other leaders, which would be great. I'd love to hear from people about who do they want to hear in the podcast? What are the topics that you want to hear about that would be helpful to you? You can do that by leaving a rating and review, but you can also email me at nick@nickblevins.com and just let me know. How are you using the podcast? How is it helping? How can I make it better? And who would you like to hear from? We can ask anybody, to be a guest on the podcast. They won't all say yes, probably, but we can certainly ask anybody. And we've had some awesome leaders on the podcast so far. And Heidi is just another one who's going to help us grow. Whether you serve in children's ministry or youth ministry, this conversation will be helpful to you, even though she leads in children's ministry. But these conversations, these topics that we talk about, they cover all of ministry, really. So I think this will be really helpful. So let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Heidi. Well, it's great to have Heidi Hensley on the podcast with me today. Welcome, Heidi.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your church.
So I am a children's pastor in Northern California. I am at Bayside Church in Granite Bay, California. We are, like most these days, one church, many locations. So we are a multi-site venue. I have been in kids ministry for the last 21 years and absolutely love what I do. Can't imagine myself doing anything else. I am a mom of boys, so I think that has helped in the equipping phase of life. My husband and I have two boys that are 20 and 15, and my husband and I have been married for about 22 years, and he comes from the law enforcement community, and it's made just kind of a fun lifestyle. Lots of interesting stories that go along with life.
Yeah, I bet, especially in police work.
Yeah.
And having kids and kids at all always make life interesting. But two boys, I know all the problems I caused for my mom growing up, and our son has that same thing going on, even though he's much younger. So it's fun, though. It's fun. I love it.
Good.
So, and you've been at Bayside now just a year and a half, right? You just recently made that move?
Yes, been up here about a year and a half, and spent the last 13 years in the Central Valley at a church down in Stockton. Yeah.
That's awesome. So today we want to talk about tough topics for leaders, which you offered up. So I don't want people to think that I said, hey, can we just hit you with all the really difficult questions about ministry that are controversial? You suggested it, so this is your fault. But they were great ideas. I think they are the kind of questions that we all want to hear other people discuss and talk about. What's their perspective? What does it look like at their church? Because it's just real. I mean, we were talking before we started recording about a few of these and how this is exactly what's going on at my church this week. You know, we're having the same exact conversations. So they're real, which is great. Yeah. So we'll start with one that is maybe odd, even how we say it. But what happens when, and of course, people listening are leading children's ministry, they lead youth ministry or family ministry overall. And this is one of the many where it relates to all of those areas. Are there times when we should fire a volunteer? I mean, right, they're volunteers, but it's not working out. How do we do that? Should we do that? Is that weird? What is your perspective on that?
My biggest answer to that is yes. Sometimes you have to fire a volunteer. I think in ministry, we all hope to at least have the same goal in mind, but there are moments where it becomes clear that maybe they are either in the wrong ministry or shouldn't be serving in kids ministry at all. So when that comes up, you have to look at the goal in mind. And if your goal in mind is to have this happy, healthy environment where kids come and they encounter God and that's your goal, your end goal, and there's somebody who's not making that easy, I think that separation is okay. One of the ways so I'm going to kind of go through conceptual and then practical. That was the conceptual. That's good. Conceptual side of it. On the practical end, first of all, if you have to fire a volunteer, it should never be a surprise. You should not have to walk up to them and they're going to be stunned and learn in that moment that you have a problem with them as you're firing them. It's, you have to think through the eyes of an employer really in this sense. Most employers will give you kind of a warning and then a talking to. Some, if it is a moral failure or whatever it is, there's going to be those times that you have to probably rip the Band-Aid off. But for the most part, it should never be a surprise. And the steps that I use to walk myself through that is identifying that somebody has an issue. So let's say that this person is just terribly rough around the edges with the kids. That's the example of the volunteer we'll use for this one. Say 3-year-olds volunteer, terribly rough around the edges. My first step would be to have a conversation with them and make them aware of what's taking place. After the talk, I would just kind of monitor the situation and see if it improves. If it doesn't improve, my next step would be to train. So you talk and then train a little bit, give them ideas. Maybe they just don't know how to talk to the parents, or they don't know how to talk to the kids, or they're nervous. How have you leaned into them to train them a little bit better? So you've talked, you've trained, you're still monitoring. It's not improving. The next step would be, I call it moving seats on the bus. Sometimes they're on the right bus, they're just not in the right seat. And maybe that seat looks more like, helping with prep and crafts, and they're not hands-on with the kids, but they're still active in ministry. Because after all, the thing you want to remember is they're there for a reason. There was something that called them into wanting to serve in your area of ministry. So try to shift the seat on the bus and see if that helps. If that doesn't help, the next step is to pull them aside and just kind of make them aware it's not improving and to reassess the situation. This is often a conversation that looks for me like, hey, we've been working through these steps. We had a conversation. We've done some training. We even tried a new seat. It's still not feeling right. How do you feel? Do you feel like maybe I should connect you to another ministry? And I have those kind of conversations because I don't want them to feel like I just don't want them at church. It's just not working in that position. Sometimes I will have someone go, I would be willing to try. Maybe the older kids are where I need to be, or, and they'll go to high school ministry and try that. There's most times that they say, no, let me give it another shot. And if it's still not working, basically in that assessment conversation, I let them know, hey, let's try this for 2 more weeks. Maybe you're right. In 2 weeks, I'll go back and talk to them and go, hey, you know what? You were right. This is perfect. Or, hey, it's still not where I need it to be. I'm going to have to ask you to to step down. And by the time you hit that step down request, you've walked through, I never do that whole process in under a month. It takes me a month to walk through all those steps. It can take longer, but the fastest that I would do that is a month. So those are the steps those are the steps I walk through.
And somebody could take those steps and just write them out and just make that their process, right? I mean, just follow this. And I think that would be really helpful. I love how you have training there at the early portion, because that way we're kind of assuming maybe it's our fault first, right? Like maybe we didn't train you well. So that could be on us. And so let's make sure we fix that. That's good. And then even moving seats. Again, maybe we didn't figure out where your best fit would be. Yeah. Let's try that. That's true. That would be really helpful. I noticed you didn't say send them a text and tell them they're fired, or email them, don't come back this week. We'd rather not have you.
Yes, let me just state the obvious there. Let's just assume we all know that none of that communication took place digitally. Those are all face-to-face conversations that shows that you value the person. And I mean, I have had some tough people in ministry. I've had some of the grumpiest old men in my 21 years of ministry that they were there because they loved kids. They just didn't know how or when to express that. And so that training piece has turned probably, I don't know, if I had to guess, I would say 80% of the people I've walked through this process with, I didn't have to get further than train, because it really did fall on me for not equipping them and giving them some options.
That's good to know. And I think, obviously, you would probably agree, most leaders, it's church. They're volunteers. We're trying to be nice, especially depending on how your personality is. Our problem isn't usually that we're firing people too abruptly. It's usually that we're not. And they're sticking around and hurting the team culture, and everybody else is like, why are they still on the team? But they don't say it either because they're trying to be nice. They just quit. Isn't that true? Sometimes other leaders quit. When
it's totally true.
You keep team members who aren't a fit. I know that's the big thing for staff, and it's just true for volunteers. That's helpful. I think it's good. We had you and I obviously think the same, because that idea of like it should never be a surprise is a big thing for us too. And I remember years ago we had a volunteer who served in preschool, and it was mostly a maturity thing. But then we moved her to elementary, and it wasn't working there either. And there had been these conversations, and the last one, it was sad because obviously you always feel for people that want to serve in the role, and it's just not working. But when our elementary director came to her and said, okay, let's meet, we need to meet again. The girl started to cry and said, you're going to fire me, aren't you? And it was sad because it was true. But the part that was helpful was at least she recognized it wasn't working, versus again, just showing up like, I thought it was great. I don't understand. This is the first time you're hitting me with this. So I think that's helpful. And you said the fastest it happens in a month is typical to 3 months. I mean, when's it? Because there's also too long too. So is that 3 months maybe? What is that?
Yeah, there's a too long. When you have a talk, you should see. This is my personal opinion, obviously. Each person can be completely different. But when I have a talk, that talk better result in something the next time I see them serve. Because the talk for me is a very serious. It means one of two things. Either they know it's happening and they don't care, or they didn't know it's happening. And we all know when you bring something, like if you came to me and said, you're kind of abrupt when you talk to parents, that would be the first thing in my head the next time I talk to a parent, to go, oh, I need to smile. I need to be friendly, So you want to see an immediate change from the talk. The train, I usually give about 2 weeks. The move seats, about 2 weeks. And then reassess to dismiss is actually pretty quick. I no more than 2 weeks. So I would say for me personally, the longest I would stretch this out is probably 2 months.
Okay, that's good to know. That's helpful.
Yeah.
And I like how you have time, like you specified the time for each one too, and you're doing that in the meeting with them too. So it's very clear.
Yes.
Like we're going to talk again in 2 weeks, regardless whether it goes well or doesn't. And obviously we're probably mostly talking about things that aren't related to skill. Like it could take somebody more time to develop as a better teacher. But that's usually not why you're letting someone go. And you probably know about that early in the front end anyway, as you're training them and bringing them on board and all of that stuff. That's helpful. So that would be like the warm-up question, right, in terms of tough topics, because it's a tough one. But the next one definitely takes a step up. It's way more difficult, more controversial. And that's the idea of how do we navigate the tensions of gay marriage as it relates to children's and family ministry, student ministry, and it intersects in many different ways, obviously. And as we're recording this, it's always weird when there's like news in the Christian world. I don't even know what that really means. It means it's not news to anyone else that's not Christian, probably. But there's talk on the internet and social media about Jen Hatmaker and her position that was recorded in an interview on same-sex marriage, and I guess that was shocking. And certain stores are not going to sell her books and things like that. So it's clear that even in the Christian world, people disagree about this topic. Yeah. But where it really hits for children's and student ministry leaders is when it becomes practical in their church with real people. It's not just a conversation, because that's easy.
Yeah.
Where it gets hard is when it's really happening in your church. So what are some ways that you've seen this show up in your church? And I'm sure it's happening in those listening as well. And what have you done? How have you approached it?
Yeah. So one of the pastoral stances that is really a thing where I serve is the ability to disagree without demonizing someone. I think it's something that the Christian world in general can do a better job at, myself included. I'm not completely, perfect there. So it's the ability to have a different stance and a disagreement without, really it's seeing the person how God sees them, a person worthy of love, a person worthy of grace, without the judgment factor. Now the judgment is God's peace, and that's not my job. My job is to show the love of Christ to them. So with all that being said, I think there's two things that the Christian world can do a little bit better, and that we, even in kids ministry leadership, as this starts to come more and more onto your plate, the two goals that you should always have in mind are treating people well, treating people as you would hope you can treat them as, Jesus is treating them, and then standing by your biblical values. Those two pieces, when they come together right, they make a really cool scenario. What we're seeing, I'm in Northern California, so I've actually been seeing this for probably the last 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years ago, I had two moms that were attending our church, lesbian couple, and they had a daughter that they were bringing. And I asked them at one point, I said, so that we disagree? And they said, yes. And I said, so why do you come? Why do you bring your daughter? Why are you this involved? And it wasn't that I didn't want them there. I was really curious that something that was such a big disagreement, they were willing to have pushed to the side a little bit. And it was, both of them had been raised in church. They disagreed with the stance on homosexuality, but they wanted their child to know Jesus. And I think the way they articulated that for the very first time, and that having been my first experience with this, showed me that if I treated them poorly, I was going to delete a child's opportunity to know about Jesus in a way that I thought she should. And so it taught me to view it very differently and interact very differently. That relationship grew in the sense that they brought their daughter. I loved their kid. It was just this great, odd situation. And one day they came and they said, okay, we'd like to sign up for baby dedication. And I kind of sat there and I took a step back, and that's probably your first step, and I'll go back and forth between conceptual and practical again. Your first step is to either know what you need to say in that moment, but if you don't, say you need to step back and assess the situation. There is absolutely nothing wrong as a leader with saying, you know what, can you give me a week? Can you give me a day? I just need to have some conversations. You are not expected, be it biblical or doctrinal stance, to have this instant, snapback reflex. So take some time and form your words well, and people will thank you for that. So I actually stepped back, and I came back to them and called them into my office and just shared that I couldn't have them participate in baby dedication. And one of the moms, she kind of got angry a little bit, and she said, oh, this is because we're gay. And I said, actually, it's not. I said, well, it is, but it's not. And the other mom's laughing because she knew exactly where I was coming from. I said, here's the thing. The way we believe at this church, we believe that homosexuality is a sin. Choosing a sinful lifestyle is a sin. If you were an unwed couple and you had chosen to live together and you had walked in this office and sat down and said you wanted to do baby dedication, I would tell you that you can't, because we believe premarital sex is a sin, and that would be a sinful lifestyle. So it is because of the sin that we identify as a church that I can't have you participate in baby dedication, because you're choosing to remain there. And they both just kind of looked at me, and one of them said, this is the second conversation with the church we've had, and that's the first time it's been stated in a way that we feel like it's not about us. And, I was happy in that moment. I was a little brokenhearted for the situation, but I was happy that I was able to not make them feel poorly about the church in general, about Jesus, about, the Christian world. They knew they were still loved. They knew that I cherished their daughter, but they also knew that I stood firm on the beliefs that I personally had and that we had as a church. And so that was a huge situation that I have now seen mirrored probably 10 to 12 times in my last 15 years of ministry.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure many people listening have had to navigate that well. And I think it goes back to what you talked about earlier too, that you have to figure out what are your beliefs?
Yep.
Where do you stand on these things? And then it does get messy when it's, well, how do they apply? Because you could totally believe one thing about marriage. How do you define it? How's the Bible define it? So then how do we define it as a church? So then what falls under the category of sex outside of marriage? Because obviously with gay marriage being legal in terms of the government in all 50 states, that just gets more confusing. So do you, when we talk about marriage, do we mean how the government views it? Do we talk about how the Bible views it? All of that. So it's important to identify your own beliefs. But then you do have to figure out how does that play out in real situations? Because obviously, like you said, they attended your church, they believed differently than your church did. And up until this dedication, that was okay. Like there wasn't a moment where some decision had to be made or anything like that. And another one that is where that decision probably has to be made is with volunteers. Like at some point, churches have to decide. And again, they can decide however they want and base it on their beliefs and practice and all that kind of stuff. But they have to decide somewhere, what does it look like to volunteer or to lead, maybe even a higher level in our church as a volunteer, and how does that intersect with what we believe about this topic? So how have you navigated that, and what are some tips to help people do that as well?
Yeah, so, the church has so many different angles when it comes to the practical and policy and corporate side of the world that we live in. The first reality is to know what your church believes in their doctrine. And that's why I say, if you're not really sure how to articulate that, find an elder, find a pastor who is, because you don't want to, like the words that I had with them that day, it was a script in my mind. It was coming from a very loving place. These were people I greatly cared about. It broke my heart that, we disagreed, and in what I believe they were choosing a sinful lifestyle. And so I made sure that nothing was going to come out of my mouth that represented the church poorly from a policy stance. Everything I said had been run by my pastor first. So, have those conversations, prepare yourself, because the time will come where you have to have them. The other side of that, for the serving side of that, the way we've handled it is kind of chasing what we just said, which is knowing what we believe. And then anyone who serves in our ministry signs a code of conduct. And the code of conduct basically has some of the big rocks in it. One of those rocks is when it comes to moral, I don't want to say moral failure, but when it comes to things like choosing a sinful lifestyle, I think is how it's worded. It's not in front of me. But it covers alcoholism. It covers drugs. It covers being appropriate on social media. And then it does actually cover this, because that has been several times, and it actually names it in there in parentheses. It has homosexuality, living out of wedlock, things like that. Because a lot of people are still learning some of the churchy verbiage, and we want to make sure that we're being clear. And there have been times that people have come and said, hey, I would love to serve. I didn't know that about them. They're going and signing things and they go, oh, this is a problem. And so I explained to them that, yeah, if that is a problem, then we can't have you serve at this time. But we encourage you to keep coming. And there will be other times that you can get involved, but that would not be something that we would allow you to serve with.
Now, I should probably clarify this on the front end, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we're talking about the practice of same-sex intimacy, because that's different than the orientation or desire, right, of being attracted to the same sex. You said it. You said it's the pursuing of a lifestyle that your church has defined as sinful. Yes. And that's important to distinguish, because I think a lot of people could say, well, I do have that desire. Does that mean I'm disqualified? And then it's like, well, everybody is tempted. So
so
you can put all the sins in that category of tempted. That's not the issue. It is the practice, and your code of conduct outlines, which I'm sure many churches listening have the same kind of thing, outlines some of the key sinful practices that you're saying this is not okay. If you're pursuing this in your life, and it can be any of these things, this is just another one of them, then you're not going to be able to serve at this point. And then I guess when it comes up, you're having that conversation again, and you're I don't know, for you practically, does it look like, do you use the code of conduct, or do you just talk about it? Like if somebody were to, you found out they're living together outside of marriage, doesn't matter, same sex or not, and now you have to have a conversation. What does that look like for you? What has it looked like for you?
Yeah, no, I actually did have that conversation not too long ago with a couple who had decided to move in together. And part of it was, the newness of Christianity, and not, people are convicted at different times in life, and God works in their heart at his pace. And I totally understand that. And so it was kind of funny. It was a young couple who decided to do a housewarming party, and I got the invitation. Like, they sent me one. It wasn't something hidden. And I'm looking at it and going, wait a minute, they're not married. So it's that realization. And so I went to her and I said, hey, so I just want to ask you. And she said, yeah, we're moving in together. I know it's a big step. And I said, so here's the deal. Here's how we stand on that. And there should be accountability. And, you walk through the biblical pieces with her. And then I did actually pull out the code of conduct. And I said, that's why this is here. And she just kind of looked at me and she goes, oh, well, we're getting married. We're just not married yet. And so she actually at that point decided they had purchased a home, is what it was. She had decided to stay with her mom for accountability reasons for the next couple months. And she stayed on as a volunteer. But there have been times where I have sat down with the code of conduct and they said, yeah, that's not working for my life right now, so I'm going to need to step down. Most times when you pull that out, when you actually say, hey, this is what we agreed upon, and as a church, we have to abide by this, it's usually them stepping down at that point and recognizing I'm either willing to refrain from doing what is disqualifying me to serve here, or I'm not. And when they say they're not, then it is by their own might that they step down.
Yeah. And I think it's important too that, as the years go by and our culture becomes more post-Christian, we just have to be ready for people to not even to be ignorant maybe of what the Bible teaches about all kinds of things. So,
Absolutely.
That make it into our code of conduct. We're not just talking about this topic, but there's so many things where it's like, I'm not surprised anymore when I talk to someone who's been following Jesus for some period, maybe hasn't totally given their life to him, but has been to church for a while and still doesn't at all believe certain things. It could be anything. And part of you's thinking, I know we taught that at our church probably 3 times in the last, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like it hasn't been discussed. I don't, in your group, you've probably talked about it. And so, we just have to be ready, I guess, for whole generations of people that don't have the history, don't have the teaching from when they were younger. And it really is new. And so they're just like thinking about it in some ways for the first time.
Yeah.
I think we have to be ready for that.
The other side of that, that sounds very black and white. And I think when it comes to our biblical stance, we do have to be black and white. But I truly do wholeheartedly believe there are moments that grace wins, that there are moments when the Holy Spirit taps you on the shoulder and says, if I burn this bridge, or if I cut this cord, I just feel like I could walk better with this person. Several years ago, I had a woman come to me and say, I messed up. I don't live this lifestyle, but I had a one night stand and I got pregnant. And she was serving on my nursery team. And she had actually made the decision to turn this into an adoption, into a surrogacy adoption. And there was just something within me, every ounce of our code of conduct, everything probably would have. Now we don't, cut people off for sin. Sin happens. It's when you're choosing that lifestyle over and over and over. And so I pulled her in, and we actually decided that we were going to walk with her with our lay counseling team. There were some things there that were much deeper rooted in her childhood, things like that. And we walked through several months of, counseling and things like that with her. And then when it came time for her to have the baby, we prayed with the family that took the baby. I mean, it was a whole thing. And that was just one of those moments where you're like, I really believe the Holy Spirit was saying, you need to be her family right now. So, you have to really assess each situation. It really isn't a bullet point thing.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about, because like you said, there are plenty of times that it's just black and white, but we will talk about how the trajectory of someone's life matters as well.
Yep.
So whatever the topic is, where are they headed with this? And you kind of said it by saying, are you choosing that life over and over again versus, oh, you have clearly made an unwise choice here, a sinful choice.
Yeah.
But is the trajectory of your life and your decisions not that way? Is it really going this way? And it's just different. And that's where people, we want it to be easy. It's not. It's messy, and we want it simple. And if this, then that, and it's just not how it works. So I think it's helpful for you to share, some of those stories. So that's probably the toughest topic we'll talk about, the most controversial. So now we can step it back a little bit. And this is one, though, that many people wrestle with for sure. And it's the idea of, what if my pastor doesn't really buy into the importance of my ministry, children's ministry, youth ministry, whatever it is? What if they clearly don't see it as important as I think it is, or just don't buy into the vision of it? How do you approach that? What do you do there?
I mean, that's not That's not typical, right?
No, it happens to no one. But just in case, for those few people, that have that.
Just in case.
Now.
Yeah. So I actually don't make many friends. I should have probably told you that first when I talk about this topic, only because, and I'm just kidding. Totally. The first 10 years my husband and I were married, he was a senior pastor. And so I have a very different viewpoint of a pastor's perspective than most children's pastors, mostly because I was married to one for 10 years, and we're still married, but he changed occupations and he's still very involved in ministry. But what that did was allow me to see what is on his plate. Basically, what I tell people when I speak on this topic is the reason that your senior pastor is not fired up from the soul over children's ministry is because it's not necessarily his calling. Now, his calling is the church as a whole, but there's a reason that God calls children's pastors and then pastors. There's a reason that God calls men's ministers and youth pastors, all these different kinds of things. One of our jobs as a children's pastor is to get them excited about it. It's to keep them informed. It's to keep them on board. And so the thing that I have noticed personally in my own life is the moments that I felt like my senior pastor was disconnected, he was uninterested, or even seemed to not care about kids ministry. It was the times that I was not involving him. And that went everything from me realizing that I needed to get his excitement on board, because we all know when your senior pastor is excited about something, you will hear it from the pulpit. And so if I could engage him in a way that this was at like the front of his brain, I knew that I was going to do two things. I was going to get him excited about it, which also got the congregation excited about it. And then in turn, he's now showing interest in my ministry. So things as simple as doing, the silly things we do in kids ministry. We had something where we did a football theme. Well, at the time where I was at, the senior pastor was just this football guru. And we did something that if if he could throw a football down the center aisle of the church on Super Bowl Sunday and this one kid was going to catch it, and he was more excited about that. He really didn't know the details of what the project was. But what he knew was we engaged him in a way that he was excited about. And suddenly, for the next 3 weeks, this man was in the pulpit just going on and on and on about how quality our children's ministry was. The reality is his calling is to care about the church as a whole, the shepherding of it. And if I need him to be excited over the left side or, the kids' side, I've really got to do my work and do my homework. He's not going to naturally just pick up on that. And, when I teach this to other leaders, it really is that sense of going, what are you doing that intrigues your pastor? Is he intrigued by numbers? Is he intrigued by worship? What are his personal interests? And what can you do to tie those to what you're doing in a kid's room that he probably hasn't stepped in a very long time? And the reality is that he doesn't want to be in there necessarily, or not that he doesn't want to be in there, but that he doesn't really belong in there at all times. He is shepherding the church as a whole. And it's our jobs to highlight that area that we know is so important. And so when you lay that out, some kids ministry leaders are like, well, wait a minute, that's falling back on me. I wanted you to tell me something that my pastor needs to do differently. The funny part is he will catch on. You've got to bring it to him. And so it's a very different mentality.
Yeah, most people would love for like, hey, can I just give him this recording of of your talk where you tell him what he should do differently or whatever. But it's true. As you were saying that, I was thinking it's true on the other side too. Like for us to be excited about our pastor's preaching, it should be because of how he's preaching and us in the service. You know what I mean? Listening.
Yeah.
Like, it's probably not fair for him. I think it's the best case is we are both actively helping, right? That's probably the best case. Like I'm coming into the service excited, anticipating what my pastor is going to teach, and I have that attitude. I think that matters a lot. However, it would be weird if like I was if he's preaching and he feels like we have to do all the work. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It doesn't really matter if you've done your work or not, or if you've prepared well and all of that. We should just get excited about it no matter what. Yeah, that's not the case. And I think your point about pastors just having so much on their plate and their time shouldn't be spent so much in kids ministry or student ministry, even from an excitement or an energy standpoint, because we don't have to spend 90% of our time on all the other things they do. That's a good point. I think that's really, really helpful. And so, and you mentioned too, which so many people have said, I think that's key, is learning what they like or what matters to them, like almost their love language as it relates to what excites them about ministry. And you said numbers, or is it stories, or is it, what is it? That's really helpful. That's good.
Yeah.
So as we jump to the next topic, this is obviously a big topic in church world today, I would say, and it's a big reason why I started this podcast. But how do we help families get more involved? I call this the Family Ministry Podcast. I really only call it that because it's about children's ministry and student ministry, like all of it together. But that phrase, family ministry, is used in other ways, like the idea of partnering with parents and helping them and all of that. So how do you define that, and how do we help families practically get more involved in our churches?
Yeah, so getting families on board, I think it actually kind of sounds like getting your pastor on board, to be really honest. And we're talking like in the four walls of the church right now. I'm not even referencing family ministry. But how do I get families involved at church in what their children are learning and doing and seeing? Some of that is, there are some church cultures that they can just put out a sign-up sheet and they're gonna flock to it. I am not in that part of the world. I don't know where that part of the world is, but someday I hope to move there.
It doesn't exist. It's okay. It doesn't. I don't think it exists. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think it does either. But we can all dream. So what do you do? I think a lot of it is kind of equipping them both mentally and strategically. Parents don't truly, I think sometimes, I don't want to say they don't understand, but the truth is they really don't. When you walk onto church, you have to, I don't know if you've ever done this. This is one of my favorite things to do, and I try to do it at least twice a year, where I try to walk onto my campus with no tasks. I've gotten myself duplicated for the day. I am not working. I'm not doing anything. And I try to walk in and check in my kids, which is funny when you know my kids are 15 and 20, but I still actually do check them in.
Yeah.
But I try to go in as a consumer. I try to go in as a parent and go, what's happening? And you realize I've made it from my car to the door of the kids building and 8 people have talked to me. I've been handed 4 flyers. I've checked in. I've been given instructions now by 6 different people in the kids building for different various things. I've exited and gone to the worship center where I've been handed a bulletin that has however many pages in it, sat down, and now it's time to just tuck all of that in my purse and take in the sermon. Take in the sermon. You stand up, you've kind of still got the sermon marinating, and as you exit, you're handed more flyers. You get to your kids' room, they hand you coloring pages and take homes and all this, and you get to the car, and the first thing that I think, at least, when I get to my car is, put this stuff in the trunk and get to lunch. There is so much information that I don't even know where to begin. And so when I do that, I try to assess what are my parents experiencing. So we've toned it down. First of all, when they come in, they are only to receive things that are absolutely current. And it's usually a maximum of 2. And we try to engage their sight, sound, smells. We treat them like kids.
That's probably good. Yeah.
we do. And so right now, for example, we are running a mission focus it's called H2Go, and it collects coins for water filters for kids in Kenya, so kids can have clean water. When they come into our building, we have water sounds playing over our speakers. Everything they see has raindrops and drips of water. It's all about water right now. Water and coins, water and coins. And so by the time they leave our building, I didn't have to animate flyers. It was really engaging them on that level. And so now that's at the forefront of their brain. So when their kid says, oh, hey, we're collecting coins for water, they're now engaged. But so that's the educational piece. That's how you're engaging them on the educational side. But how do you get them involved? How do you get them in the room? Most parents, Bill Hybels did this study where he talks about the statistics of why people don't serve and why parents aren't involved in their child's room. And the highest reason on that survey was that because they feel inadequate. And, just having something where you can pull parents in and say, we don't need you to come in the room and teach. We don't even need you to come in the room and lead songs. We just want you to be in the room. And offering an opportunity where your parents can come in the room and just see 3 things. And, we tell our parents this. We want you to come once a quarter and just see. And we want you to see how your child engages in worship. We want you to see how your child engages in prayer. And we want you to see how your child engages with his community of believers. And technically they're serving, but they're kind of not. They don't actually do anything other than help us with our ratios in the back of the room. And they do help supervise a little bit, but they know that they can come in totally unequipped and witness what their child's doing. And that's going to give them a better platform to discuss with their kids, which, as we know, anything you do that brings my child to the center of my attention is going to go, hey, I noticed he wasn't engaging in small group. Could I lead a small group and just kind of help him walk through that? And that's where we're seeing a lot of that involvement.
So you have parents come in, you said once a quarter. How does that,
Yep.
Is it always the same? I mean, is it just once a quarter is the rhythm, but in essence you have parents coming in all the time? Is that how it works? Or is it really grouped around specific Sundays? How does that work? I think that's a good practical way. One, obviously you're helping with volunteers, but even this idea of getting parents more connected with their kids, you're right. I mean, if they see it happen, then every week after that, they know exactly what their kid did in terms of the format, which just helps when they talk, when they discuss. And I think that's really good. So what does that look like practically?
It makes everything from the ride home even easier because the parents have now experienced the format, so they can ask, relevant questions. So for us, that looks like, and this is something that I did for many years in Stockton, and it's just starting to get off the ground here at Bayside. It is happening all the time. So basically, the set expectation is that you are to serve once a quarter in your child's room. You can sign up for any service any weekend. So it really is that rotational piece, and they're welcome to come in at all times. When they come in, they're treated like a VIP, that kind of thing. We have snacks for them. We have a Keurig for them. Grab a cup of coffee, come in your kids' room. And it's all 4 weeks. We currently have 6 weekend services. So there's really no point that they can't come in. So they can sign up for any of the 6 services. They can even come for an extra service to see if they want to attend one, serve one. But we prefer that they come and actually just attend with their child that week. So any weekend, any 6 services, it's not specified at all. And the volume of our church, we'll see about 2,000 kids come through our building on a weekend. And so if they all came in one weekend, we couldn't fit them in the room.
Sure. So obviously if they sign up, that's one thing. But if they don't sign up, do you guys have a system where you're asking them like, they hadn't served, in 6 months, or you email and said, hey, we'd really like, how do they know, I guess, the expectation of the once a quarter, I guess is what I'm asking. And how are they reminded?
So that is a culture that we are just getting off the ground here. And this is something I started there and ran for almost 12 years. The steps to that culture is we would like to invite you. We want you to be part of it. And you'll have those core parents who go, ooh, this is new and exciting. I'm going to come in and do this. And they start to buy into that culture. The next step is the next layer of people that you're noticing really they're not your PTA parents. They're the parents that drop off and then pull away from the school parking lot. That group of parents is, hey, we kind of expect you and this is why. And it's not because we need you to come serve in the room or clean tables. It's because this matters to your child. And so we lay out the reasons why it's the expectation. That's where we're at right now. The next step of that will be, okay, we've seen these layers of parents. Now it's the newer parents who really aren't sure when they are going to engage. And those are the parents that we hope as we do this. And this is what happened before, whereas that becomes part of the culture that everybody knows that this is kind of this co-op mentality that we're all in this together. They will start to sign up as they grow roots there. If they are not, then we will send them personal invites through our software system to go, hey, this is the expectation. This is why we love to see our parents in the room. When can we expect you? Here's some dates. And the reality is you have to decide how you're going to do it. When I kicked off this model in Stockton, it was never a requirement. It was an expectation. And so those parents who never served, I had to let that be between them and God and their family. I did have a sister church that we trained to do this. And for them, they were a co-op and this was a requirement. And if you didn't serve, you couldn't drop your kids off the next Sunday.
Wow.
I know.
They were
and
on
kudos for him. He was on it and it worked for them. And people would apologize and reschedule. And if you want to have that much to do, I say go for it, I guess. That's not really my style. Just because I know that people will come as they feel led to come. And the other thing is we're not hurting for supervision in the room. He did it because they were a much smaller church and they had to have the involvement to be successful in ministry.
Yeah. Which is a tough place to be. And
it is a tough place to be.
There's so many other things that, impact that. Is there anything else related to helping families get more involved or, walking with them, when they're new to what does it look like again, that you all do that helps them? Because you're right. I think that perspective of coming to church like a visitor is good. In fact, I don't know if you've done this, but having getting somebody to come be a secret shopper at your church is awesome. Oh yeah. Too. Handpick somebody that has kids, the right age. And I think you could go either way. Cause I think to me though, the best is you get somebody who is in ministry so they know what to look for, or you get the person that's not part of any church and you pay them some money and they're like, sure, I'll come and give you some money and buy lunch for my family. And why not? And that's even better. Cause then you're getting the completely unfiltered of what it's like to be new. But is there anything else you do as a church to help parents connect? And it could be early on, when they're first getting there, or it could be, they've been a part of your church for years. You're just trying to help equip them. Is there anything else you'd share that, you do or that you've seen done that's helpful? Yeah.
So when you visit us, you receive the packet that probably every church hands them that has the parenting classes and the resources. So you make them aware of the resources. And then I chase that with a letter that usually goes out the Tuesday after they visit that just kind of offers my hand in guidance, which is, hey, we loved that you guys were here Sunday. We love that you connected. And this is more for our visitor side of it. It offers like the next 3 things. So I'm big on bite size. I think when you overload people, you may as well have just not given them anything. So bite-sized communication. So it's the one that will go out this week is, hey, kids choir is coming. If you're new to us, we would love to see your kids sign up. And that's an instant way to get plugged in. We invite them to 2 or 3 things at the bottom of that and then follow up with them. Follow up is huge. You don't see that a lot in church anymore. So we really try to stick to that. But the other side of it is our church as a whole is very big on small groups. And so we call it Circle Up, and it is the invitation to just come and be part of something. And you can't get from your car to the sanctuary without being invited to sign up for a small group. And, you know, we're a very large church, so making it feel smaller is a very, very important piece. And then, you know, lastly is making sure that once a quarter we gather the families. We'll do a bowling night. We'll do, you know, family festivals and things like that where parents can come out. They all have kids the same age, and we're very intentional about that time and going, find somebody new that you haven't connected with and make a friend. That's, after all, why we're coming to church. We're coming to church for relationship with God, but also relationship with others. So really focusing on the relationship side of it.
That's interesting. You said you have, you know, it's hard to get from there to the sanctuary without being invited to a small group. And you do that every week. I mean, that's just part of your culture.
Oh, yeah.
You've got different ways that you're inviting people. I think, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I think people would love to see the packet that you do give to new families. Mm-hmm. And actually, I've been putting together a resource that has a collection of those. Related to children's ministry specifically. And so I'd love to, if you're up for sharing it, you know, digitally or whatever that looks like, a picture of it, you know, I think that'd be really helpful. We'll put it in the show notes. And if by the time this releases, the other, you know, the whole resources together, I'll put that in there too. And people can look at a collection. Because when I was asking churches for this, you know, plenty of churches have systems for new visitors, right? So they have that, and, you know, we could get that. And there's actually already some good resources out there for that. But related to children's ministry specifically, I didn't find a lot. So I found some, and this will be a helpful resource. It's about a dozen or so. And I'd love to add yours to it. I think people would love to see that, to see specifically what are families getting. I think that's helpful.
Oh, yeah. And it's a fun, we actually just revamped it. So I will get you the new one that I'm super excited about. It's like this cardboard envelope, and there's 4 sheets of paper, but they're layered, so they're staggered, so you can see the top of each one. For each age group, we have one for special needs ministry, and then we have one for baptism and baby dedication. But also in that is a Thrive Kids window cling, you know, for your vehicle ride, so you can sport our logo.
Nice free marketing. That's a good idea.
Free marketing, and then and they're so cheap. And then the other thing in there that we love to give families is every summer our worship band. So Lincoln Brewster is our worship pastor. So we're a little bit spoiled in that region.
Yeah, I'd say. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. You didn't know that? Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
So he's our worship pastor, and our rockin' worship team writes 6 songs for our summer camp. And we put those onto a CD, and that CD, which is our worship music in the building for the year, is in that packet. So if your kid comes and you're new, we're also going to give you the music so that next Sunday when they come, if you've been playing in your car, they can sing along. They know what's happening. And so that's one of my favorite things about the packet.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes so people can link and see that. We love free stuff and love seeing what other churches do to see what we want to do at our churches. That's great. Cool. Well, Heidi, this has been awesome. Thanks for doing the interview, especially these tough topics that you volunteered for that I'll remind you of. I didn't hit you with these. But I think it's great. This is it's just real life ministry, right? It's the things that we deal with week in and week out.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think this has been really, really helpful. If somebody wants to connect with you, ask some questions, follow, what would that look like? What's the best way to connect with you?
I am freely on Twitter. So Heidi M, as in Michelle. So Heidi M Hensley is my Twitter handle. And if you take that same Twitter handle and put a .com at the end. So HeidiMHensley.com. I do have a blog with lots of resources and a contact form on there.
Awesome. Well, Heidi, again, thanks so much for doing this. This has been really helpful.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
That was really good, wasn't it? I'm glad Heidi was willing to hit those tough topics because they're so important. They come up all the time, and I just think we can be better equipped to tackle those and lead in the midst of those. That resource that we were talking about there at the end, you can get that and everything else in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 26. You'll love seeing what Heidi's church gives to new families to help them stick and connect and come back after their first visit. And I mentioned that I'm putting together a resource where it'll have samples of a bunch of those from other churches. So when that comes out, I'll let you know. It's not out now, but you can hear about that and any new thing that comes out just by subscribing. Go to nickblevins.com and look for the free resources tab and subscribe there by downloading something, or download the 30 apps resource. Any of those things will get you subscribed, and you can hear about new things such as that. I can't wait till that comes out. It actually was hard to put together because there aren't many churches that do it and could share with us what they do. So here's some action items I had coming out of the interview. One is to think through your new family follow-up process. Not just what do you give them, but what does it look like when a new family comes to your church? And here's where it gets difficult. You have to think through it from the entire church perspective. So you don't want to create an entire system to follow up with new families that doesn't factor in the system and the processes that already exist to follow up with new adults. Usually that's where churches have a process. And so think through that, figure out how you can best follow up with new families and help them connect. And then the rest of the action items, they can get specific. Is it the conversation about sexuality? Is it the conversation about with a volunteer who's not doing well in their role? Is it with your pastor? And all of that, I would say, can be summarized under the action step of have the conversation. Sometimes it's hard, depending on our personality. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to address it. But this is something we talk about on our staff, that we need to have the conversation. That's important to make things right. It's not easy, but we want to make things right. And so have that conversation this week. Don't put it off. In the next episode, we're going to have Tom Shefchunas from North Point. He's the multi-campus middle school director at North Point Ministries in Atlanta, Georgia. And we talk about two kind of distinct but really important topics. One is the coach volunteer role. What does that look like? A volunteer who leads other volunteers. Tom talks about how they failed 2 times at putting that in place, and it took till the 3rd time for it to stick. So we learn from that. And then we also talk about kind of metrics. How do you measure what matters most? Like, what do they measure? Why do they measure it? And it's not like they measure a ton, but they know what they care about, and they find some ways to measure that. So you don't want to miss that conversation. It'll be really helpful. So be sure to subscribe. And like I mentioned in the intro, if you could leave a rating and a review, that'd be really helpful. And thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.